The scream tore through the house like a blade. It was the kind of sound that stops everything, that makes your heart drop. Somewhere in that massive estate, a child was breaking, and the person everyone trusted was the one causing the pain. From the outside, the Ashford estate looked perfect. Tall windows caught the morning sun, gardens stretched endlessly, and a pool shimmered like glass. Inside lived Thomas Ashford, one of the city's most powerful men. A billionaire whose name opened doors across 3 continents. He had built his empire with discipline, sacrifice, and countless sleepless nights. Yet there was one part of his life where money, power, and reputation meant absolutely nothing. That part was his daughter. Charlotte was his only child, born with Down syndrome. She was 7 years old with eyes that sparkled and a smile that could melt the hardest heart. She was his treasure, the only person who could make him forget the world. But that treasure came with challenges his wealth could not shield her from. And he soon realized that not everyone saw her the way he did. Before I take you deeper into the story, let me pause for a moment. If you believe in kindness, in protecting the vulnerable, and in standing up for what is right, please take a second to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Whispers of Light. Your support helps us continue sharing real stories that inspire hearts around the world. Charlotte's mother, Eleanor, had passed away when Charlotte was barely 2. A sudden illness had taken her far too soon, leaving Thomas to raise their daughter with nannies, therapists, and specialists. At first, he thought money could solve everything. He hired the best professionals from London, brought in speech therapists, installed special sensory rooms. He convinced himself that if he spent enough, Charlotte would have everything she needed. But deep down, he knew no hired professional could ever replace a mother's love. Still, he did his best. Charlotte was gentle, sweet, and full of life. She loved music boxes and stuffed rabbits. But she struggled with words and emotions. Every small frustration would end in tears. Every loud voice around her would frighten her into silence. Thomas soon remarried, thinking he could give his daughter a mother's love again. But not every smile hides kindness. The woman he chose was Victoria Pemberton. She presented herself as charming and elegant in public. But behind closed doors, her patience with Charlotte was thin. She resented the child's special needs, felt burdened by the constant attention she required, and little by little, her frustration began to show. When Thomas was away working late nights or traveling for meetings, Victoria's temper grew sharper. She scolded Charlotte for the smallest mistakes, treated her as a burden, and even instructed the staff to keep her out of sight whenever guests visited. Among the house staff was a young woman named Grace Harrington. She was 24, with auburn hair and quiet strength. Grace came from Manchester, the eldest of 5 siblings. Her younger brother had autism, and she had grown up watching her mother fight for him with fierce love. So when Grace met Charlotte, something clicked. She recognized that vulnerability and made a silent promise that while she worked in this house, Charlotte would always have someone in her corner. Grace noticed everything. She saw how Victoria's face would harden the moment Thomas left. She heard the cruel edge in Victoria's voice when she scolded Charlotte. She watched Charlotte's shoulders tense whenever Victoria entered a room. And Grace could not stay silent. Whenever Charlotte's tears came, Grace would kneel beside her, speaking softly until they dried. When Victoria's temper flared, Grace would gently take Charlotte's hand and lead her away to safety, perhaps to the garden or the conservatory. Grace became Charlotte's shadow, her protector, the only person in that enormous house who consistently chose kindness. Thomas, for all his intelligence, was blind to the war under his own roof. He worked 16-hour days, traveled constantly, and when he was home, he was too exhausted to notice the signs. Victoria was careful, always wearing her mask when Thomas might see. And Charlotte did not have the words to explain what was happening. She just knew that when father was away, the house felt colder, and Grace was her only warmth. Then came the day everything shattered. It was a Tuesday in late September. Thomas had been in Brussels for 3 days, negotiating deals worth millions. He finished early, caught an afternoon flight, and arrived home while the sun still hung in the sky. He walked through the front doors expecting quiet, planning to surprise Charlotte with a music box he had bought her. Instead, he heard crying. Not just any crying, but Charlotte's desperate, terrified sobbing. Thomas dropped his briefcase and moved toward the sound, his heart pounding. The crying came from the drawing room. He pushed open the doors, and what he saw froze him in place. Victoria stood in the center of the room, her face twisted with rage, shouting at Charlotte. The child was pressed into the corner of a sofa, trembling, her face red and streaked with tears. And there, seated beside Charlotte with arms wrapped protectively around her small form, was Grace. Grace's eyes were calm but fierce, locked on Victoria. She was whispering to Charlotte, words meant only for the frightened child in her arms. When Victoria saw Thomas in the doorway, her face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, surely to make excuses. But Thomas held up one hand, silencing her without a word. His eyes moved from his wife to his sobbing daughter to Grace, whose arms had become a shield. In that moment, something broke open inside him. He had spent years believing that money was protection, that hiring the right people and providing material comfort was enough, that his absence could be made up for with bigger paychecks. But looking at this scene, seeing his daughter's terror, and realizing the only person brave enough to protect her was a young woman he paid barely above minimum wage, someone he had barely spoken to beyond work instructions, it shattered him. All his wealth, all his power meant nothing here. Grace had no fortune, no position, no safety net. Yet she was the one who chose to be brave, to be kind, to be human. Thomas's voice, when he spoke, was quiet but carried absolute authority. He told Victoria to leave the room immediately. Victoria tried to argue, claiming she had simply been disciplining the child. But one look at Thomas's face, at the cold fury in his eyes, and she understood it was over. She left without another word. Thomas approached slowly, not wanting to startle Charlotte. He knelt beside the sofa, and when Charlotte saw him, she reached out with both arms. He gathered her up, held her close, and felt her tears soak into his suit. As he held her, as he felt her gradually calm down, he looked over her head at Grace. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, Thomas understood what he had been too blind to see. This young woman had been the real parent all along. She had shown up every day, not because she was paid to care, but because she genuinely did. That evening, after Charlotte fell asleep, Thomas had a long conversation with Victoria that ended with her packing her bags. There were no second chances for cruelty toward his daughter. The marriage was over. And as for Grace, Thomas sat down with her the next morning and asked if she would stay on, not as housekeeping staff, but as Charlotte's full-time caregiver. He offered her a salary that made her eyes widen and his eternal gratitude. Grace accepted, not because of the money, though it helped, but because she had already fallen in love with that little girl. From that day forward, the Ashford estate began to feel different. The heaviness lifted. The fear disappeared. Thomas restructured his life, spending more time with Charlotte, making sure he was home for dinner every night. He learned to slow down, to play with stuffed rabbits, to celebrate the small victories. Grace was always there, a constant presence, someone Charlotte trusted completely. The house that had once echoed with anger slowly filled with laughter, and the child who had cried in fear now bloomed with joy, knowing she was safe and loved. Thomas learned a lesson no business school could teach, that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought or negotiated. That true protection comes not from wealth but from good people willing to stand up when it would be easier to look away. That kindness is the rarest and most precious thing in this world. And that sometimes an angel walks into your life in the simplest form, and if you are wise enough, you will recognize them for what they truly are. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to Whispers of Light, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness is the greatest wealth of all. Before we end, please leave a comment below telling us the most powerful act of kindness you have ever witnessed or given. Your words might inspire someone who truly needs hope today.